I think it's important for humans in general to understand that there is more than we thought there is. And it's also really to help some of the people that we otherwise couldn't reach. And then they start to open up. And that is for me a win. Whether they then sign up for the quantum upgrade or for something else, or they don't ever do it. But if they understand that there's a little bit more, they become more curious. I think at that moment, we help to make the world a little bit of a better place.
You're listening to The Human Upgrade with Dave Asprey. You're listening to The Human Upgrade with Dave Asprey. Today is an upgrade spotlight version of the show. And what that means is that I'm going to go really deep with the inventor of a new kind of biohacking technology. So companies come along every now and then that are doing something new and interesting. And it's one thing to see an ad on Instagram or something. It's another thing to talk to a founder and ask questions. How does it work? What does it do? So you can decide what biohacks are interesting and what are the principles behind them that you can apply to your life, whether or not you decide you're interested in the things we're talking about. Today, the guest is Philipp Samor von Holtzendorff-Fehling. Did I say that right? Last time I asked the same thing, but I can't remember.
You did. Do I get an award for the longest last name?
I think so. And all you guys have to do is Google his name and you can find out. Okay, don't do that. He is the CEO of Quantum Upgrade and Leela Quantum. He's a conscious entrepreneur, coach. He does energetic healing work and spent 20 years training in shamanic and other energy medicine practices before he stepped into what he's doing with Leela Quantum. He came on the show in episode 1013, and he's learned some new things since then in rolling out the Quantum Upgrade. And to be really clear, we have very strong evidence that humans are quantum systems. And the biggest evidence I've seen so far is that every time your heart beats, the proton spin throughout your brain changes direction in alignment with your heartbeat. And that can only happen as a quantum effect. There's also PhDs in quantum biology, which is a very, very hard science using instruments of advanced particle physics to understand biology. So we know something is going on here, but there's huge gaps in our knowledge. Doesn't mean that you can't exploit those gaps to make changes in the system at a level that you're not going to see, but that you can measure. And it was that understanding that led me to at least entertain what I was hearing from Leela Quantum. And when I tried it out, I was like, oh, this stuff works and it's really interesting. And that's why he's back on the show. Philipp, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me on, Dave.
You and I share some interesting background in boring corporate jobs, although maybe not that boring, but boring-ish. And then cutting over to working on improving the condition of humans. Why did you leave the corporate world?
Well, so in 2016, that's really when I made that cut, and I couldn't do it anymore, to be honest, because it had been a stretch already beforehand, because in the early 2000s, I realized that I had cut myself off my own emotions and feelings, and I was really unhappy in my life, and I needed to do something. So I started to, right? That's kind of what you do. And it was still right for me to be in corporate, but at some point, really, I so much became myself and needed to be myself, and I couldn't really be that in the corporate world, because there you always play a role that I could play really well, and I'm sure you played it extremely well, but that's not really who I am, and not really what I want to do, because we ultimately all need to follow our hearts and need to do what we really have to offer and follow this inner calling and then work from that. And that's really what became so evident in 2016, that I just could not do that anymore. And I also didn't want to hide any part of myself. And then I said, okay, done with it. And that's a hard decision to make sometimes, right? Because you make a whole lot of money. And then for me, it was, I didn't have the quantum tech at that point ready to go, right? That would have been easy. That was actually something that came out of me making that decision, saying, yes, I'm going to do what I have in my heart. And I started doing this. And then more and more of that came in, which is the beauty of how the universe works, right? If you move into the right direction, then suddenly the universe really provides.
You talk about quantum energy, and I always give pretty much anyone who's not a PhD quantum physicist or biologist a bit of a hard time. Like, is this really quantum? So how are you defining quantum energy? And is this the technical definition of quantum, or is this a marketing definition of quantum?
So very important to understand, we're not working with quantum mechanics, for example, at all. And to me, that's quite a theoretical rabbit hole. If you really dig into that, there's a lot of fluff, a lot of models. And while I really loved in a way that the 2022 Nobel Prize for Physics was awarded for work on quantum entanglement, I'm like, well, this is great because it gets into the consciousness of the people, and people start to realize that there's way more than they thought that would be. But does that what these people did really help us so much other than creating some more awareness about that? You can't apply any of that, what they do. We work with the real deal, and you can apply that. You can apply quantum entanglement yourself. And you can, with a quantum upgrade, actually feel it. You can test it. You can study that. It's right there. So it is absolutely possible. How do we define it, though? It's the energy behind the matter. It's the same energy we have in each of our cells. That's the energy we talk about. You could also call it source energy. And then some may say, whoa, source. Well, source is something different. No, source is not something different. We are at core energy and frequency. The breakthrough, what we've been able to do with our technology so that listeners understand that, is not that we created source energy or that we created quantum energy. No, that's not at all what we did. We were the first ones to be able to harness and concentrate this pure natural quantum energy in a form and way never done before. And then I'm saying this in regards to what's publicly available in terms of information, because I'm certain there are people out there, and there were people like Tesla, for example, that were able to do that in a different way. But also Tesla knew exactly how to actually vibrate the ether and access that. Now, he worked a lot on electricity. We do not at all work on electricity, but it's the understanding is pretty much the same. So I want to mention all of that so that people get an understanding that we really work with the real deal. We don't work with theoretical models, and everything that we do can actually be tested, can be seen and felt. And yeah, we'll get into that probably.
We will. So when you say you're working with the real deal, you're really saying the way we're doing it yields measurable results versus theoretical results.
That is so. So, obviously, we could say all day long, well, hey, this is how it works, and just believe something, right? That's not at all what we're doing. Actually, we say, well, go try it. You can try it for 7 days for free. Actually, I think with, if I'm not mistaken, with code Dave, you can try it for 15 days for free, and then you can see it for yourself. And we literally go out there and say, anyone that wants to test it, anyone that wants to study it, please do. And there's lots of different institutes and labs and doctors' offices all over the world that have done this by now. And I don't know the exact number right now, just in regards to quantum upgrade, because in a way, if we look at the total technology and what we've studied, I think we're by way over 60 studies by now, and over 50 placebo-controlled, most of them randomized double-blind. Just for quantum upgrade, I think we're at over 30 studies by now, and in various different fields, right? It's very interesting. We're talking about significant increase in ATP production, which is very, very physical, right? You measure that in a lab with actual human cells, and there's nothing like fluffy about it. It's very, very clear. You can just measure it, right? And you have a control group, and then it's double-blinded, so there's no doubt about it. The same with wound healing, for example. How can this be that, this energy from the quantum upgrade can accelerate wound healing by up to 100%? We've seen it as low as 50% and as high as 100%. In most cases, it was somewhere between 70 and 100%, which is significant, right? Then you see it in the blood. You see your blood improve. Actually, all the different markers that you can look at under a dark field microscope. And I want to break the news here actually on your show, and we haven't really talked about it. And I haven't told you about it. It's actually a finding that we've already had about half a year ago, that the Base Institute found in dark field microscopy studies that the parasitic load in the blood was also decreased significantly through our technology. And they measured even up to 80% reduction of parasitic load in the blood within 15 minutes. Now, granted, that was the most positive case, right? So who reacted very well, but that shows the potential. But they've seen at least a 25% reduction in parasitic loads. And right now, there's a study actually going on where they're just focusing on parasitic load because they still have all the pictures from all the past studies. They weren't focused on parasitic load though, but they can still do that. So I think within the next 4 or 5 weeks or so, we'll be able to specifically talk about parasitic load a little bit more as well.
Wow. What is the relationship between electromagnetic energy and quantum energy?
Great question. So the quantum energy is sort of the umbrella. It's literally what is the lowest level of energy, or you could certainly also say the highest level of energy, right? It's certainly the umbrella in which all frequencies exist, whether that's molecular frequencies, etheric frequencies, scalar frequencies, sound frequencies, doesn't really matter. Any frequency exists in that. And then that's the most like transparent and energetic part, right? This part, because it's not really a part, and it certainly is not a particle, like the quantum mechanics guys would tell us. And then within that, you move more into the physical, whereas then you go into the electromagnetic spectrum. That is something that you can already measure with scientific tools, EMF meters and stuff like that. And then you go into more denser form of different energies and frequencies. But just because that is the spectrum that we can measure or learn how to measure with scientific tools certainly doesn't mean at all that the other spectrum doesn't exist, just because we don't have a scientific tool for that. So that's why, these studies exist and people look at before and after effects, because we don't yet have a quantumometer to exactly say, okay, we can just measure like an EMF meter. I hope, though, that we'll have it in like 5-6 years, because, frankly, if we had that, that'd be a lot easier for us.
You mentioned that you can measure it, yet you believe you're increasing it. And the evidence you have that you're increasing it is that both of your main sets of technologies, the Leela quantum devices and then the quantum upgrade service, they both work in dozens of trials. So you're getting a result, but how do you know the result is from quantum energy, not something else?
Well, first of all, we see that energetically. That's before we even go into the scientific testing.
That means like with your built-in biosensors, you see it energetically. So because you're shamanically trained, you can sense it?
Well, I have a certain sense and I have certain capabilities and things that I learned, but really I'm not the top-notch guy for that, but we have that on the team. There's literally like X-Men like capabilities, and not in terms of X-Men of like spitting fire or something like that, but on a frequency level and energetic level, in order to see vibrations and move vibrations, that is indeed X-Men level. And that's how we see it at first. Then we use, the typical kinesiology as well, just to cross-reference certain things. And then we develop and see, and then we move into first testing. And then we move into the scientific testing. And then what we already knew beforehand gets validated. And then usually we find out a lot more things that we didn't know before. Like the thing with a parasitic load, we had like an idea about it, because I remember that Roman Hafner, who is like one of those that I just talked about, he had told me about 2 years ago that Lyme, for example, cannot exist. They can't exist in an environment, an energetic environment that is of such high vibration, that they would first start to hide, and then at some point they they can't come out anymore for a long time, they sort of disappear. And which is interesting because we've heard that from several people, how they get better, right? It's just an additional layer. And limes and parasites are not exactly the same, but they're very close.
Lime is a parasite. It's a spirochete parasite. It's a question of the size of it. It's not a worm, but yeah.
Yeah. So it sort of makes sense, but it's so great that we have both sides, right? For us, obviously, it's great that we know things beforehand because it cuts maybe 10, 15, 20 years of development time, right? We don't need to do a lot of trial and error with certain things. We do have long development time still, but it could be like 10 times longer if we didn't have that capability. But then having the actual scientific testing so that you can prove really on a physical level, okay, really clearly, okay, you turn this on, this happens. You turn this on, that happens, right? It's very clear, and we're glad to have that capability.
If you're listening to this and you're saying, well, that doesn't make any sense. What do you mean some people have abilities others don't have? You ever watch professional basketball or table tennis? It's not that they were naturally better, although there probably are some genetic advantages like being tall. It's that they train the hell out of it. And if you believe that you cannot train your ability to perceive things energetically, I would argue that you probably haven't ever asked whether it's possible, because we have thousands of years of different lineages around the world doing exactly this. Just take some percentage of the population, lock them in a monastery or a cave for 1,000 years, and write stuff down every generation before you die and tell it to the next guys. And eventually you realize, wow, you can sense things. And I know people who can walk in a forest at night and never walk into a tree, even though they're blindfolded. How do they do it? Because we have sensors that aren't turned on. And I've spent many, many hours working with experts from different lineages. And I know because I have people who are very powerful in my life. And I know because I've learned some of the skills. It's possible. It's doable. So is it conceivable that Leela Quantum can have some people on the team with the ability to sense when there's more energy or less in something so that they can make things with more? I think it's credible. But even then, I think it could be a complete nonsense. So when I first tried one of your blocks, the physical version of the product, I was like, why are they sending me a golden block and where's the power supply or whatever? I'm not a skeptical guy. I'm curious about things, but I'm also not easy to deceive. But it was pretty straightforward. I put some flowers, some tulips on it. I had 2 bunches, somewhere on it and somewhere else in the room because it balanced out the room. And strangely, the ones on the Leela Quantum last 3 times longer, right? And you can't make that up, right? This stuff happens. So I travel with one for EMF mitigation. I think it makes a difference. But I wanted to talk about the quantum upgrade. And when you came to me, you said, Dave, I want you to talk about this on the show. I'm like, seriously, Philipp, people aren't going to believe that you can do it. But I know some of those same people with the abilities you're talking about, and they can influence things at a distance, right? And they do, right? So it's something that's technically possible, but the quantum upgrade service, you basically are changing the quantum state around a person. You're doing it remotely, but you've never told me in our conversations offline over lunch. So how do you know how to target the quantum upgrade? I'm giving you my name, birth date, and kind of what country I'm in, and magically it's going to find me out of 8 billion people and change things. It kind of stretches credibility.
Yeah, I can explain that. That's actually fairly easy to explain. It's very easy to understand, and I know that you asked the question for the listeners because you do understand as well.
Well, I use it.
Yep. Because first of all, whether it's 8 billion, 800 billion, 800 trillion, doesn't matter for a high consciousness field. That's the first thing we need to understand. Our brains are limited. We cannot even comprehend that even something would be possibly running in parallel at that level. It just, the brain cannot comprehend. But so that's the first thing to understand. Very, very different for a high power quantum energy field or a high consciousness field. The second thing is that once you understand how the field works, what you need to do in order for quantum entanglement to really work, which for me, quantum entanglement really isn't that you have one particle that you then connect with another particle, because for me, the tiniest part isn't a particle, it is energy, right? So, but you can combine energies. And so I have a specific energy signature. You have that as well. And an elephant somewhere in Africa has also another energy signature. In order to place via quantum entanglement the elephant into the field, into the quantum upgrade field, which is one of the most powerful sources of quantum energy on Earth that we have created, we need the exact energy signature, something that is a direct link to this elephant. That could be a picture, for example, because that would identify exactly this elephant. And it's not the elephant's mother or brother or any other elephant. It's exactly that one, right? It could also be a part of the DNA of this elephant. In terms of going back to a human now, if it was me, we could also leverage my name, my birth date, my birth city, and the country I live in. That is what we determine. You can also do a little less, but then if you have a John Smith, for example, you want to be like a million times certain that it's really that John Smith that this is linked to.
Right. How does that work?
So then you have that information, which is a direct link to the source of that information, which would be that specific John Smith. That is placed into our quantum upgrade system. And in that moment, that John Smith is in the field. And then we were able to program it in a way that John Smith can say and determine how strong does he want the energy to be. He can select different levels for nighttime and daytime. He can, if he has a tennis match at some point, he can say, I want to have a booster at 4 p.m. because that's when I have a tennis match. He can now even select different frequencies, which in the case of a tennis match would be the Olympic performance frequency, which actually further helps with ATP production and cellular energy and all of that. But for the night, he could choose, okay, I want the inner peace frequency because I want to relax more. And all these things he can choose. And as a data set, it's connected to his link to himself. And that is how this works. And of course, not everyone can now understand the whole thing, right? But that's as much as I can explain it, because it's certainly not an easy thing to explain. But in a nutshell, that's how it works. And it works in 100% of the cases. So it's not random or anything. Like it's not at all random.
You're saying it's not random because you've done a bunch of placebo-controlled trials and something's happening.
Yeah, that's how we prove it. I mean, we knew even before the trials that it was not random, because otherwise it would have been sort of crazy. But indeed, yeah. So the trials, they certainly prove it, and then you can test it also. Whereas of course, there's some people that have lost the ability completely to even sense anything. They can't even. I mean, if you ask them how do you feel, they say great, but they haven't even thought about it. They haven't even felt. Like, that's the world we live in, that we're currently coming out of. But anyone that's sensitive or can perceive energy, like instantly, they can feel it. Or there's some other people that told us, well, there's someone that actually wanted to try it and said, yeah, I want to try it and all of that, but knew nothing about it, hadn't read anything about it. And we usually tell people, don't put it on high settings at nights, okay? Because at nights you don't want to be stimulated. So that person said, well, I'm just going to crank it up like 24/7. Couldn't sleep for 3 nights. And then was like, what did I do? Oh, turn on the quantum upgrade. Okay, whoa. Reached out to me and I said, well, I mean, are you crazy? Turn it down at nights. Turn it down, slept like a baby.
So it's quantumupgrade.io/Dave, and you're giving people a free trial. And I will admit, I just keep mine turned up all the way all the time. As high as it'll go. And I still sleep well. And that's probably because I'm an alien or something. But I do believe that it makes a difference. I also know that I run large levels of power through my nervous system and my energetics. At least that's what all the energy workers I work with will tell me. When I was younger, in my 20s, I started first working with a couple different energy worker, Reiki kind of people. And then one of them said, I don't want to have an appointment with you. And I said, why? And she said, because every time I work on you, I have to sleep for 2 days and it's just not worth it. So apparently I was burning people out. And that's not really a measure of power necessarily. It's more a measure of dysregulation. Right? So if your energy field's flopping all over the place because you don't believe it exists or you're unaware of it, or maybe you have a more powerful field than an average person, or maybe you've developed one, and what you do with it, it actually matters. So these things are out there. And when you talk with people who are in a trusted environment and they're not worried about people saying they're crazy, we all have experiences like this. We all know people like this. And it's hard to recommend to someone, here's how you would learn how to do this. Do you have a favorite way of telling people here's how to tune into your ability to sense someone's energetics?
Well, yeah, I would always start with starting to feel ourselves a little bit more. There's actually a couple simple things that anyone could do maybe for just a week and then see if that made a difference, and it will. Every morning, when someone wakes up, just the first thing, don't pick your phone, don't talk to your spouse or anything, just stay in bed and ask yourself, how do I feel? And don't expect an answer. Don't even worry about it, but just listen. Just whatever comes up and just stay with it for like a minute. And then do the same thing. You go to bed, lights are out, put your phone away, and don't talk to anyone. Just ask yourself the question, how do I feel? Right? And you can certainly expand that. How was my day? And, all these things. But just 1 minute in the morning, 1 minute at night. And then we start listening. We start listening to what's inside, truly. We're not focused on the outside. That starts to build the sense for ourselves again. And when we get that back, then we can also start sensing others more. And then we can start perceiving energies more. It's just a matter of awareness. It's like, you brought up basketball. If you want to win Wimbledon, you need to practice, right? If you never picked up a tennis racket, you need to start doing it, right? If you want to end up in Wimbledon, you need to start doing that. And that's the same thing. It's a muscle that we need to train. It's a muscle we all have. And certainly there are talents and all of that, but it's something, just start doing it. And I think a lot of people are afraid of it because we feel unsafe, right? Because we're so familiar with paying the bills and working off tasks and answering emails and thinking about problems. We're a little bit unsafe when it goes into the energetic because we don't fully understand it. And it's like this huge ocean of maybe unknown stuff, right? But once you start going into that, then a whole world opens up. And it's not the matter of understanding or being in this full ocean right away. It's just try to expand a little bit more, stay with it, and look what happens. Like Tesla said. And I think this is, for me, it's one of the best quotes for these times. If you want to understand the secrets of the universe, you need to start thinking, you need to think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration, right? And it's so true. It's so fundamental.
I would suggest that people check out breath work. Look at the last 2 chapters of Not Superhuman, the last 2 chapters of Smarter Not Harder, my most recent book. I talk about some of the techniques, but we know meditation works. We know breath work works faster. When you come to the Biohacking conference at the end of May, beginning of June, Dr. Joe Dispenza, who's become a friend, is speaking on stage about the science of meditation and the biological effects that it has. So if you're listening to this going, I'd like to be more sensitive, more attuned to my own field. You want to be attuned to other people's fields, be attuned to your own. And it is a path of learning and curiosity and paying attention. Lots of tools, lots of technologies. Biofeedback is powerful. For me, the most powerful is neurofeedback, which is why you can go to 40 Years of Zen, and which is my neurofeedback called a mystery school, Brain Upgrade Academy, or you can go to Upgrade Labs now, and we do brain training there because I feel like When my brain has subtle fluctuations, I'm not going to see them. But if my brain gets a sound when it does it, eventually I know what it feels like when my brain changes. So then I can make it change. There's many paths, but it's just something that you can do. Now, you're one of the only, if not the only, commercial company that I've seen talk about the Hawkins scale of consciousness. What is the Hawkins scale of consciousness?
I'm actually glad you're bringing it up because it really fits to the conversation. The Hawkins scale was developed by Dr. David Hawkins quite a long time ago. And he was a PhD that was extremely tuned in. And so he created this scale from 0 to 1,000, where he determined the low levels of consciousness being, really on the lower end: anger, fear, guilt, shame. You can find these in the low end of the spectrum. Then you move into unconditional love at 500. You can move into joy. Then you're at 540 on his original scale. And then between 700 and 1,000, he determined that's the enlightenment zone. So you can calibrate objects, people, locations on the Hawkins scale and basically calibrate how high they vibrate, which consciousness level do they have. And what's very important to note is that Hawkins' work is on one hand, it's more relevant than ever, right? Because it's so important that we start understanding these things and maybe also learn about what is an attractor field, and we can get into that as well. On the other hand, though, some of what he came up with is outdated, and there actually needs to be now a new book. Now, he passed, so he's not going to write the book. We've been even thinking about doing that, but I don't have the time at the moment. But it's really fundamental to understand that the vibration on Earth has changed in the last 10, 15 years, absolutely significant, and it keeps changing every year. So the vibrational level that was possible at the time when he wrote the book, Power versus Force, and set up the scale was completely different than what it is now, because he was seeing this limit, right? There's this limit. No one can really vibrate higher. He determined at the time, well, a regular human can just increase their own consciousness level by like a 15 or 20 points in a lifetime. There are exceptions, but that's like the normality. And yeah, that may have been true 20 years ago. It's completely false today. The matter of fact, we know that as a human, you can increase your consciousness level. I mean, I don't want to say it's infinite, right? But to a vast degree. And certainly what's not there anymore is the 1,000 limit. It's just not there anymore. And frankly, I couldn't even tell you what the limit is because we don't see a limit anymore. It's literally infinite. And as crazy as that now sounds, that is pretty much what we see. And each year, we always check in, okay, what are the levels that are now even possible and what we can do, right? So at the quantum upgrade now, you have booster levels available. Well, frankly, that's just for people that have been with the quantum upgrade for a while, because we can't offer this to new users. That would be, too much energy. But you can go to up to 2,200 on the Hawkins scale for a booster. And that's amazing. That's such an amazing vibrational level. It's really, really cool. But we couldn't have offered that a year and a half ago. It would have been too much even for people that have worked with that. That is how much everything is shifting. We're all shifting. And that's a great message, frankly. But that's in essence how this Hawkins scale works, right? And then the attractor field, because that was kind of like the teaser. And probably some people are thinking, okay, so but what is an attractor field? So what you think you become and what you think and what you feel you draw into your life. That's pretty much how it all works, right? This is how this reality works. So if we're in a low vibrational state of fear and anger and guilt and shame, that is exactly what we're calling into our lives. And that is exactly what we'll have in our lives. Now, if we start vibrating higher, let's say gratitude, right? I know you're really big on gratitude. And so if you go into the gratitude, you're suddenly changing your vibration. You don't have to be angry then at that point about something you don't have or you didn't have or you want to have and can't have it. you're grateful for what you have. And with that vibration, you can draw in way more of that suddenly, and it comes into your life because your vibrational state has shifted. So if you're vibrating in unconditional love, that is also what you'll be seeing in your life. That's pretty much how that works. Now, with the quantum upgrade, you can work on your attractor field, right? Because you can not only increase your own vibrational level and train yourself literally, because it's your system is learning that, right? It's not that you always have to have it exactly like that. You're learning how to do that while you're doing it. And you can book in a frequency like gratitude, for example. If you have little trouble getting into this gratitude mood, you can book that in. Olympic performance frequencies, you can book in these frequencies and then you're vibrating in this level. And I tell you something, if you have the gratitude frequency on, people will notice that, right? People will notice that because they pick it up. It's like you walk into a restaurant and there's 5 tables and you instantly see that this one table, they have stress at the table. They may not speak, but there's tension. You can feel these things if you pay attention. And maybe there's a couple that just fell in love and you also feel that vibration. They may not talk, but you can feel it, right? And people can feel that about yourself as well, whether you're in anger, whether you're in guilt or shame, or, we try to hide these things often from other people. But nevertheless, at least on a subconscious level, we all notice that.
There's a name for the state you're talking about. It's a state of grace. The closer you move towards being in a state of grace, which means you have constant gratitude and you have forgiven everything that you possibly could that was a trigger for you, and that you constantly run that process. So if anything new pushes a button, you just let it go. And people who walk around like that, we've all met people and you're like, what is so different about them? Well, you can measure some of that in the human biofield by measuring photons. You can measure it in heart rate variability. You can measure it in brain waves, which is my favorite way with the 40 years of Zen stuff. But what underlies all of those forces in the body? It is provably quantum energy, because the entire universe at the lowest level that we can detect is a quantum field. And maybe it's an information field under that. I don't think we know yet, but it's probably quantum is the lowest level. So there you go. That means that there's some stuff that may be emerging from changes you make at the quantum level. I found David Hawkins' books to be really, really powerful, and it would have been really amazing to interview him, but he's passed. And if people haven't read any of his books, Letting Go is, I think, one of my favorite books. And he writes extensively about how he came up with the Hawkins states of consciousness. And he talks about how, if you're stuck in someone with lots of braids at Burning Man would say, you're at a low level of vibration, man. But what they're really talking about there, it is a sense about a person or about a thing. And it is editable, it is changeable, and there are practices you can do that change your happiness, they change your performance, they change the size and shape and length of distance biophotons move from your body. And all of this, if you said it 60 years ago, would have sounded like nonsense unless you lived in an ashram. But I just spoke with 2 PhD quantum biologists at a startup that is extending human lifespan. And they're measuring single photons that come off of cells and measuring information in them and learning how to manipulate photons and play them back for cells to instruct the cells what to do. So there's a lot going on that you don't see. It doesn't mean it's not going on there. And I think the Hawkins scale is really useful. And I think anyone with a big ego is going to do their own muscle testing. They're going to say, look at me, I'm at level 7 billion on the Hawkins scale. So I don't trust my own readings all by themselves. I like other people who don't know my number to measure someone, and then we compare notes. And if we agree, I'm going to fully trust it. If it's just me, I'll trust myself if it's all I've got. But I know that, like all humans, I'm capable of wishful thinking. In fact, my powers of self-deception are legion. It comes with being human. How do you know that you're not subjecting yourself to those when you make the quantum upgrade?
Well, first of all, I'm not doing that on my own. It's a whole team effort. It's a team of extremely gifted people that have been already verified and validated since decades and trained tens of thousands of other people and have been called by doctors all over the world to fix the problems that regular humans can't fix and can't even see or detect. And then the scientific proof, right? That was for me very important because, I also come from that world where I had no idea, about all this energy stuff and all of that until I realized also, well, that's actually, I'm energy and frequency to begin with, right? I mean, what a miss, that we forgot about that. But I know this other world, and we in that world we just live in the brain, and we need to look at stuff. We need to look at data, and then we start to be more curious if we see something that actually really does something on paper, right? I mean, if you can look on a video and you look at blood, and then you turn on Wi-Fi or 5G, as for example done in the latest dark field microscopy study that was actually an electric car. I haven't talked to you about it yet. In Austria, that was the most powerful electric car that exists on the market in Europe. I can't say the brand. And then they can see within minutes actually how all your organs deregulate. Certainly you can see how blood clots and your white blood cells get paralyzed and all of that. And then you can turn on the quantum upgrade. And then you're still an electric car. You still are exposed to all this EMF in there. And suddenly all your organs are regulated. Your blood normalized. Your white blood cell activity and motility increased. Any more questions? See, that is what we need to show people, and we go through great lengths, frankly, to make that available. Like our biggest investments it's all going into more research because, first of all, it's close to my heart because I think it's important for humans in general to understand more about that there's more than we thought there is, and it's also really to help some of the people that we otherwise couldn't reach, and then they start to open up. And that is for me a win. Whether they then sign up for the quantum upgrade or for something else, or they don't ever do it, but if they understand that there's a little bit more, they become more curious. I think at that moment we help to make the world a little bit of a better place.
Do you believe in evil?
To believe in evil. Well, I do not believe in evil. I believe that consciousness is infinite. I actually don't believe that. I know that. And I know that everything exists. And you could call it super consciousness. You could call it God. You could call it the universe, whatever anyone feels drawn to. God sometimes is the wrong word to use because people have a misconception of it, like this person on a cloud. And that's certainly not what I'm talking about if I use that word. But literally, everything is God. Everything is super consciousness. Everything is the all that is. And that includes evil. As hard as that may be to understand, it also includes that. Now, that is on the broader level of everything, of all that is. Here in this reality, of course, things play out in a different way because we, just by nature, in order to live in this reality, we have time. Time fuels this reality. But then we also have these polarities, right? Because we have to have the night in order to have the day, right? For good to exist, also evil exists. So, you have everything. And then it's this magic game between the poles that is happening. And certainly in this reality, you can say, well, evil is really evil and it's really bad. And yeah, if you're here with a kind heart and you're in a loving vibration, then something evil you couldn't do, but you could still look at it in a loving way, doesn't mean that you're supporting that at all, right? But you don't need to fight it, if that makes sense. So that's as much as I can tell you about the word evil that you brought up.
The reason I was asking is you wouldn't want someone who was evil increasing their energy, except my understanding of good and evil is that there is such a thing as evil, and evil has a right to exist. Problem is, if you try to raise evil's consciousness, it stops being evil. So you can have power, you can have powerful evil, very powerful evil, but it's still low vibration and it cannot exist in high vibration. So they're just sort of two different polarities. So I've definitely come across evil in my life where it's a malevolent energy and it does not want what's good for life, right? And you take that and you force it to vibrate, it'll transform or die. And that's how it works. If you take someone who's really high vibration and you lower their vibration, they'll turn dark. It's how it works, at least in the world that I perceive. I asked you to do something unusual with Quantum Upgrade. I asked you to turn it on for 40 years of Zen. So when someone comes there, and that is a consciousness experience if there ever was one, or for Upgrade Labs or Danger Coffee, for all of the businesses that I'm currently active with, I asked you to do it for a company, not just for a person or a place. And in my view of reality, a company, once it's up and running, it has its own energy field. And companies are not alive in the way people are. They're not conscious, but they do have an energy field that you can influence. And I like to think it makes a difference. I don't know how to do A/B testing on that because, how will you know? But have you done any studies? Have you turned it on for other people's companies?
Yes, I mean, there's actually multiple companies across the world that are leveraging the quantum upgrade for their purposes. We have heard a lot of anecdotal evidence, a lot of great stories. We checked in based on certain questions, also energetically on what happens. We know for a fact it does, but it's indeed that is the hardest part to prove, and I don't even attempt it at this point. My latest idea in regards to that was that we could at least facilitate a deeper survey in that regard to at least get a little bit more data points in that regard. But yeah, just an A/B test or something, what would you even test? How would you test it? Right. And then it really also depends. And that's something for businesses. If what's very important is the nature of this quantum field. And that's nothing that we did. It's just the nature of it. It supports everything in regards to life and consciousness, and it neutralizes and harmonizes whatever is harmful to it. So, meaning that if there's a conscious business or a business that at least has a conscious is doing something that really supports humanity, currently, right? Doing something good,
right?
You'll get massive support. If you turn it on now for a company, I don't know. Let's pick the company starts with P, then the second letter is F, and it stops with R. And I'm not going to say it, right? But people probably know that is a typical company. And we wouldn't ever do that, and no one else can actually do that in the quantum upgrade because they would have to choose to do that, right? But if they chose to do that, suddenly everything would start to shift in a significant way because it cannot be sustained. Once you have that in such a high consciousness field, that is the evil that you talked about. If evil ends up in this super high consciousness field, it starts to dissolve and it starts to transform into something different. And I don't know if the people at the top of that company would want that at this point. Hopefully at some point.
It gets into realms of spiritual ethics or even spiritual law. And it turns out if you use your power to force someone to be good against their will, you're no better than someone who is evil, who is forcing you to maybe get medical treatments against your will.
Correct.
Correct. Like you can't engage in that.
Yes.
In that game. And it's a strange landscape when you look at the energetics of the world. And I like it that you've put together something that does this. And my explanation of how you possibly could be targeting it is that we have pretty strong evidence that the universe is holographic, which means if you have a little piece of the universe, you actually have the whole universe in it. That's the way holograms work. You can break it in half, and each half has a picture of the whole in it. And there's the Holographic Universe is a good book about that. Stan Groff did some work on that as well. And this gets pretty esoteric pretty fast. But if you're dealing at levels of reality that our human bodies are not really designed to deal with on a direct basis, you have to do a lot of thinking and a lot of understanding and a lot of tuning of your system, and you can probably pick some of that up. It's a complex and yet to be explored fully field, I would say.
Correct.
Right now, for people listening going, wait, what are the things we're talking about? Number one is there are some physical things, the Leela quantum cubes and pendants. I have a pendant here on my desk, and I travel with the cube and have one downstairs underneath my bamboo plant right now because it keeps growing. I don't know, it's in my desk drawer here. And I wear it sometimes. That's a pendant that helps to concentrate this quantum energy. And then there's the quantum upgrade service that we're talking about now, which is something you turn on remotely. And I know a guy who charges thousands of dollars a month, who's a very advanced spiritual master, and he does it for global billionaires on a regular basis. Maybe it's all hocus pocus. I don't think so. And I appreciate that you've done your blinded placebo controls. Say that's weird. If it's placebo, people who don't know what's happening still are getting measurable effects that are non-random. So there is something going on here. I wish I knew more of the details about how you're doing that. And I've asked you directly, and same answer when Joe Rogan asked me, well, how are you doing all of your testing for mold? Like, it was hard to figure out. I'm not telling you. And that's a fair answer, right? It's called a trade secret. But I do believe your clinical results are substantial and significant, which is why I'm willing to talk about it, even though this gets pretty esoteric and kind of slippery when you think about it. You're trying to sense about it. Like, okay, well, like, what's the how? If it's a pulsed electromagnetic device, like I can tell you how all this work. Like there's different frequencies, different strengths, and all kinds of stuff. And we get into this, it's a softer area, but you can measure results still. And that's the most important thing in the world of biohacking. I don't care if something is supposed to work. You know, working out 12 hours a day and eating only soybeans is supposed to work, but it doesn't. So the supposed to is irrelevant. Whether it does or doesn't is relevant. And that's what's been my guiding light in biohacking. So I'm willing to talk about this and to experiment with it and to use it because, well, that's what the evidence says. Thank you for coming on, and thank you for sharing a free trial. So you guys don't have to believe any of this. You can turn it on and pay attention and see if your meditation changes, or see if you start meditating, or whatever the heck else. But it's pretty easy to give it a try. All you have to do is go to quantumupgrade.io/Dave, and Philipp will just give you a free trial. And definitely make sure that you come to the Biohacking Conference at the end of May in Dallas. Go to biohackingconference.com. You can meet him there. You can talk to him. And if you ask him really nicely, he'll just cross his legs, sit there, and levitate for you. So be sure to ask him to do that when you see him.
Thanks so much for having me on, Dave. And I'm looking forward to the conference and to seeing everyone that stops by.
All right, I'll see you there.
You're listening to The Human Upgrade with Dave Asprey.